Nestled on Old Route 7, where three counties converge just outside the city, the Falcon's Rest operates as a bar and grill. Referred to as the Rest, it typically attracts law enforcement, making it an unexpected venue for a clandestine rendezvous, a fitting option for my purposes. I parked in the busy lot and headed inside. Compared to other cop bars, the Rest was well furnished, with a spacious bar area and plenty of tables. Despite it being a Friday with many customers, it wasn't overly crowded, ideal for meeting Sergeant Devin Cross discreetly. Upon entering, I faced hostile stares from most patrons. As a lawyer suspected in the disappearance of my cheating wife and her police lover, I expected the suspicion. There was no evidence, no bodies found, and the lover's car was missing with them. Yet I was already judged guilty due to motive and my profession. Devin arrived looking displeased with my choice of venue. A tall, strong black man, he embodied honor. He was here to settle a debt and absolve himself from the guilt of associating with someone of my reputation. I'll admit candidly, dear reader, I'm what they call bent, a lawyer with no moral compass. I'm linked to several organized crime cases as an unindicted co-conspirator. Poor Devin fell on hard times when he came to me with foreclosure papers. Devin Cross, then an officer with the Metropolitan Police, fell victim to predatory lenders during the mortgage fraud crisis of 2008. Alongside his wife and 4 children, they faced homelessness. Despite seeking help from honest and somewhat honest lawyers, he found none until desperation led him to me. Honestly, I'm not sure why I helped him. There was nothing in it for me. He was a good, loyal cop, but not someone I could use. He couldn't pay, and he was upfront about it. His last dollars were taken by internet scammers. The foreclosure was set for the next day. He sat in my office, a big, powerful man, tears welling up as he spoke about his daughter, who had cancer. He didn't know how to tell her and his sons they were about to lose their home. I filed for bankruptcy to halt the sale. Then I sent some of my less reputable clients to confront the mortgage broker and get a confession that the foreclosure documents were fake. Surprisingly, the crooked broker confessed when faced by my associates. A larger bribe to the court ensured justice, something even Deutsche Bank wouldn't pay for. Why did I go to such lengths? I still can't say, but Devin Cross struggled knowing his family's home was saved by someone like me. You picked a strange place to meet, he remarked. Even I have a conscience. I couldn't let you get into trouble helping me, I replied. So, you chose this spot? He asked as Lottie, the barmaid, approached. She wore her usual attire, a tight top that barely covered her midriff and pants that seemed painted on. Despite her revealing outfit, she was a pretty girl unafraid to flaunt her assets. What can I get you, Bruce? She asked me. She and I had a history of playful flirting and generous tips from me. She had a young son and no man at home, having chosen closeness appeal over reliability. I could sense the tension in Lottie's demeanor. Everyone believed I was guilty, so it must be true, and anyone associated with me would suffer. Yet Lottie chose to serve me herself, instead of passing me off to another server. Lottie was a good friend, and it seemed I had more friends like her than I realized. I didn't want them to suffer for being loyal to me. I needed to take action to reclaim my life and reassure people they could trust me. Devin Cross was extending a lifeline in his own way, and I needed to make the most of it. Bring us 2 Boston Lagers, Lottie, I said. You've got guts, counselor, walking into a place filled with Paul Moreno's friends and co-workers, Devin remarked. Paul Moreno was the man who had seduced my wife, putting me in a difficult situation. He, his Ford GT, and my wife disappeared the night of March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, just before back-to-back thunderstorms flooded the 3 counties around the Schoharie Creek. This body of water would be considered a river in the western states, but here it was called a creek, a misleading name that caused much suffering. People underestimated the Schoharie, building bridges and settlements around it, paying a heavy price in lives and property. By March 18th, emergency crews were busy rescuing flood victims. No one noticed my wife and her lover were missing until a few days later, when suspicion immediately fell on me. As the saying goes, victory belongs to the bold, I told Devin, and we engaged in light conversation while he worked up to the reason for his visit. I waded through 2 rounds of beers, then said, "Just tell me what you came here to say, and I'll handle the rest. Trust me, and no one will ever know the tip came from you." So he leaned over and whispered, "They've got a warrant and will raid your home and offices Sunday at 6 a.m. I pushed my chair back, stood up, and let it drop before shouting, "Listen, when I need advice, I won't be seeking it from some city cop, and he's a better friend than you. I don't know what happened to my wife for the last time." I stormed out, leaving Devin looking puzzled behind me. He was smart and would realize everyone would assume the worst of him. They'd think he was an ambitious cop trying to advance himself through our relationship. A confession from me would be a feather in any cop's cap. Trying to get a confession from me wouldn't hurt him, but being seen with me in a secret meeting would ruin him. Doing it this way in public made it so no one would believe he had warned me. As I walked out of the Falcon Rest, I sighed deeply. I only had myself to blame for letting things get to this sorry state. I let my heart override my head. Now I had to work hard to dig myself out from behind the 8-ball of justice in this country. Still, my late wife's diary haunted me. Her words were like a swarm of bees stinging my heart until it bled. October 1st, Elaine Gray's diary, Mrs. Bruce Gray. I saw him again today. He's tall and handsome with that wavy black hair of his. Jenny says she knows him. In fact, she slept with him. He's a police officer, which means he must be following me because of something involving Bruce. It's hard to believe that a somewhat dull man like Bruce could arouse such suspicion in others. But I suppose that comes with being the attorney for high-profile criminals. The people he deals with are so much more interesting than poor Bruce. Don't get me wrong, I love him dearly. He's like a cuddly teddy bear. The kind of man you feel safe with. Why people think he's dangerous, I'll never understand. Jenny says the police officer following me is quite a stud. Very well endowed. His name is Paul Moreno. Jenny's been seeing him off and on for the past 6 months. Her husband, Bob, is like a clone of my Bruce, except he has a dull real estate practice and isn't some black hat criminal defense attorney. You can't really blame Jenny for falling for the edgy police officer. I mean, the temptation must be strong. After 7 years of marriage and 2 kids, she's looking for a little excitement, or so she says. As for me, after 15 years with a 14-year-old daughter, I'm ready for the rocking chair on the back porch. Women like me just don't attract the attention of young studs. It makes me feel so old. October 15th. Bruce is traveling again. He seems to take more out-of-town trips than anyone I know. If it were anyone else, I might suspect infidelity. But he's as faithful as a loyal dog, though not the most thrilling. Started at the gym today. Jenny convinced me to join. She's really into fitness and needed a workout buddy. I'm not in bad shape, not like Bruce with his middle-aged spread, but Jenny wanted company, and I could use some toning up too. I've upped my morning run from 1 to 2 miles, but I need to work on my stomach and butt, feeling that empty nest anxiety. Maybe getting fit will help. Why did I let my 14-year-old persuade me to send her to boarding school? Rachel is just like my mother, all ambition, without much concern for others. My mother still mocks my career choice, but I believe helping others is the most noble pursuit. Social work is often frustrating, but on those rare days when you know you've changed someone's life, there's no greater reward. Then again, Rachel might be trying to distance herself from the stigma of Bruce's profession. People say such cruel things. Teenage girls are sensitive. Maybe it's better overall for Rachel to be away, but as a mother, I can't help missing her. Saw him again today. God, he's so handsome. He was at my gym. What a hunk. He wore this tight outfit. You could see his sculpted abs, but I tried not to stare at the bulge in his shorts. Can't believe that's all real. Why he keeps showing up around me, I'll never know. But Paul Moreno is certainly easy on the eyes. October 17th. Saw Paul Moreno at the gym again today. He caught me looking at him, but all he did was maintain eye contact until I had to turn away. Jenny thinks he might be interested in me, but I don't see why unless it's something to do with Bruce. When I got home, I did something I hadn't done in a while. I poured a glass of wine, grabbed my silver bullet, and leaned against the headboard. I let my mind wander, but it kept going back to Paul, his muscular body and well-endowed size. I tried not to think of him. It felt disloyal to Bruce. It was just a harmless fantasy. I came quickly. There's no harm in imagination, right? November 2nd. I voted today, not that it changes anything. As I left the polling place, I saw Paul again. He didn't try to hide. He hadn't been following me for a while, but these past few days he was back. He actually greeted me, so I stopped and talked to him. "Are you following me again?" I asked. "Well, it's my job and my excuse," he replied. "Excuse? Well, what would you say if I just followed you everywhere? Why would you do that? Have you looked in a mirror lately?" "Oh, stop. I'm a mother to a teenager." "Ever heard of the term MILF?" "No, what's that?" "It's what they call a hot mom like you who turns on all the young guys." "Stop, I'm not old." "Unfortunately, I'm a lady. Not old, just mature and hot." Just then, I spotted someone I knew and ended our conversation. I couldn't believe he flirted with me like that. Sure, I've lost 5 pounds and toned up since hitting the gym, but a young guy being interested in me? It pays off to stick with it. Initially, I felt intimidated by all those fit young women, but hiring a personal trainer and sticking with it is really paying off. Bruce definitely noticed. He sent me 2 dozen roses. When I asked why, he simply said he felt like sending them to his beautiful wife. What more can you say about a man like that? I love him dearly. I might flirt with a younger man, but I won't betray my loving husband. Jake, I said as soon as he picked up the phone. Jesus, do you know what time it is, counselor? I've been trying to reach you since about 9. I was on a job, Jake Trumbull replied. Well, I have a new job for you. Couldn't it wait? No, it's urgent. What is it? I need complete blackout coverage at my home and office by sunrise Sunday. This Sunday? Yes, this Sunday. That's typically a 72-hour job. You're giving me less than 24. Sorry, just got word that I need it urgently. It's going to cost you. How much? 35, Jake said. After all the business I've sent your way? That's my special price. For anyone else, it would be 50. Jake didn't mention how unlikely it was that I'd survive to send more business his way. At this point, business associate or not, I had no choice but to agree. He could have charged me anything, and I'd have to pay. Okay, get it done, I said. November 9th. I've bumped into Paul 3 times this past week. Now he always smiles and waves. Jenny had a full-on affair with him. She claims he's the best she's ever had in bed. He's 29, 8 years younger than me. Jenny says he makes her feel like it's her first time. There's nothing like the feeling that Big Johnson of his gives you. I asked her if he was worth risking her marriage for, and she told me to ask that question after I'd experienced my first 9-inch Johnson. Can he really be that well endowed? Just thinking about him has been getting me all hot. Last night, when Bruce came home, I jumped him. I guess there are some perks to having our daughter out of the house. Bruce performed wonderfully. He made love to me, gave me 3, but I'm ashamed to admit that the whole time I was thinking about Paul. Am I so twisted that I need to think of another man when my husband is making love to me? Today, as I sat in Starbucks sipping my mocha latte, Paul came and sat down at my table. He stared at me for a long time while I pretended not to notice, but finally, he broke the silence. I've been reassigned, he said. What? I'm not officially following you anymore. What does that mean? Well, among other things, it means my bosses have decided that whatever crimes your husband is involved in, you're not part of it, he said. Then he reached across the table to cover my hand with his and said, but it also means I can tell you how attracted I am to you now. I wish we could get to know each other better. You know I'm married. What does getting to know me better mean? He took my other hand in his, holding them both gently. It means you're a beautiful woman, married to a man who can't possibly satisfy you. You deserve to experience true love between a man and a woman. What about Jenny? I hear you and she are together. What Jenny and I had was purely physical. She's unsatisfied in her marriage, but I want something deeper. Plus, you can't honestly think any man would choose Jenny over you, he said with a smile. Like I said, I'm married. I've never cheated on my husband. Can he say the same? You've seen my husband. What do you think? I think we both know you deserve better. With that, I got up, leaving most of my latte untouched. I needed to leave. That man made me uneasy. December 1st. I hadn't seen Paul since our encounter at the coffee shop, and I started to worry, or maybe find relief, that I might not see him again. Part of me regretted this. His attention was a boost to my ego, and I had to admit I desired him purely physically. I'd never been with anyone but my husband. I was curious about what another man, especially one so well endowed and skilled, would be like. I was walking to my car in the DSS parking lot after work. I was running late due to paperwork. The lot was bright but empty. As I reached my car, I felt someone watching me. I bent down to open the door, and suddenly, he was right beside me. I jumped back in fright. Paul, you scared me half to death. Are you stalking me now? Sorry, he said, his hand finding my waist under my coat that had pulled open. I just had to see you. I think about you all the time. I should have been scared, but the truth was, he had been on my mind constantly. I wanted to see him again. Please, I pleaded, leave me alone. I can't do this to my husband. Instead of listening, he leaned down and kissed me. He was tall, strong, and masculine. He overwhelmed me, and in a cliché romantic moment, I felt a spark in his kiss. Some kind of connection passed between us. I need you, he said. more than any woman I've ever known. If it were up to me, I'd leave you alone, but I feel your body calling to me." I couldn't resist. I kissed him back, but then I pushed him away and jumped into my car, saying, "I can't. I wish I could, but I can't." They didn't bother knocking. 4 officers in assault gear picked the lock and barged into my house at sunrise on Sunday morning. I think they expected to find me asleep, but I was up in the kitchen cooking what travel brochures call a full English breakfast. I had swapped kippers for lox and found kidney pie at a specialty shop. I was just scrambling eggs in a big pan when the first officer stormed into the kitchen. "I hope you like scrambled eggs," I said as he grabbed me and pulled me out of the house. They kept me in a police van while they tore apart my house. They did the obvious things like ripping up carpet and digging in flower beds. I was glad I had mostly hardwood floors. They pried up a few boards but left most of the upper floors untouched. They completely trashed the basement. My biggest complaint was them breaking into my car trunk. It seemed unnecessary since I had left the keys in the ignition, but it seemed destruction was their mission. Despite it all, they weren't all bad. When they finished wrecking my house, a couple of officers I knew took me out for lunch at Denny's. "Where did you hide the bodies, Bruce?" they joked, as I ate a disappointing big breakfast from the menu. "As far as I know, there are no bodies." "Come on, they disappeared in March. It's October now." "Do you think it will rain today? It's been very dry since those spring and summer storms. With my flower beds gone, I'll need to replant my bulbs if I want flowers this spring. I feel for those folks around the Shohari Creek," I remarked, recalling the flood there. My companions at Denny's weren't concerned with flood victims or flowers. They had one thing on their minds: getting my confession, even though they lacked evidence. The trouble was, I knew that could change as quickly as a flood. "I wouldn't count on seeing spring flowers if I were you, but helping us out could make things easier for you. We know there must have been a good reason for what happened. Maybe you just lost control. Stop being a lawyer for once and take responsibility. We can assist you," they pressed. "I don't think it'll rain. Looks like we're in for a dry spell after all that wet weather. I'll swing by Lowe's for some bulbs." "All right, have it your way, lawyer, but cop-enders get the chair in this state. Think hard on that." December 9th. I had a hellish day. The call came early. 5 kids needing protection. Child protection isn't my usual beat, but it's our busiest time of year, and we're short-staffed due to a bad flu season and holiday needs. Handling 5 children under 7 in emergency care was tough. They were all traumatized. They had just witnessed their mother being brutally beaten by the man they thought was their father. He was biologically related to only 2 of them, but they still saw him as their protector, and he had betrayed them. I didn't want to split them up or send them to a county facility for Christmas, but what other options did we have? Around noon, I met a couple in their early 60s who had raised their own children and were still in excellent shape. They had recently retired from state jobs and were struggling with a sense of purposelessness. She had been a nurse, and he a highway engineer. By 4 o'clock, we had temporarily placed the kids and set up support for the new foster parents. Feeling accomplished, I received a call from state DSS expressing dissatisfaction with the placement. It was the typical bureaucratic nonsense prioritizing rules over the well-being of the children. They were concerned that paying foster care to retirees might be seen as double-dipping. We argued back and forth for an hour, escalating the issue to the county executive and state DSS commissioner. Just when I feared the placement might fall through, the prospective foster parents contacted me. "When can we expect the kids?" the woman asked eagerly. "We're all set up here, and my daughters are ready to help." "Well, the state has concerns about the foster care payments due to your state pension," I explained. Her response was filled with frustration. "Tell that governor to keep his money. Just send us the kids." The county executive chuckled upon hearing this. "Send the kids over. We can deal with the state later." It took another 3 hours to settle the kids into their new foster home. By the time I could leave, it was nearly 8, and I didn't get home until close to 9. I took a long, hot shower and debated calling Bruce. Sometimes our calls last for hours, but he's often busy with demanding clients. Tonight, though, I needed to share my day with someone. I just put on my robe and was about to call Bruce when the doorbell rang. I tightened my robe and answered cautiously, keeping the chain on. There stood Paul, looking as good as ever, with a hint of guilt in his expression. "Can I come in?" he asked. "I don't think that's a good idea," I responded. "I know your husband is out of town again. You're alone. I just want to come in and chat. Maybe coffee and conversation," he insisted. "I can't," I firmly replied. "You can trust me. he assured. It's not about trusting you. It's about me, I explained. Please, just a few minutes, he persisted. I'm not sure why I let him in, but I did. I made coffee, and we sat at opposite ends of our large sectional couch. I adjusted my robe, trying to feel more comfortable in its inadequate length for the situation. Relax, he said reassuringly. I'm here as a friend. I heard you had a rough day. Yeah, I sighed, and we started talking. It did ease my tension. I convinced myself there was nothing wrong with two acquaintances sharing a drink. We switched to wine and had frozen pizza for dinner. It must have been close to midnight when he brought up what he really came for. Elaine, I'll always be your friend, but I have strong feelings for you that I can only call love. I shifted uncomfortably. Please, let me explain, he continued. Right now, your husband is in New York meeting with organized crime figures and they're expert on avoiding surveillance. They're planning to evade government wiretapping. These are bad guys, and he's helping them. Stop, I won't hear this. It's not fair. Bruce isn't here to defend himself. You're loyal, but is it fair to you to be with such a man? As I got to know you and fell for you, I saw what a caring woman you are. Your life is about helping others. You're an angel with a devil for a husband. But I want you to know I'm here for you, no matter what. As we talked throughout the evening, we moved closer on the couch. Before I realized it, his hands were under my robe and we were kissing. I knew it was wrong, but as his touch felt warm against my skin and his lips met mine, I couldn't resist. His hand slipped beneath my skirt and quickly found my eager arousal. His touch felt incredibly pleasurable. As his fingers moved inside me, I let out a soft moan. We both knew where this was heading, like a runaway train with no brakes. I felt powerless, and then the ringing phone snapped me back. It had been ringing for a while. Suddenly, I realized who it was. Bruce! I exclaimed, pushing away from Paul. Bruce was on the phone. Just checking in, he said casually. Sorry if I woke you up. Lost track of time. I gathered myself to respond and tried to have a normal conversation. Bruce was chatty, going on and on. I could see Paul on the couch, growing more impatient as Bruce talked. Finally, Paul gave me a rueful smile and quietly left. Bruce's call had saved me from making an irreparable mistake in my marriage. But did I really want to be saved? Paul's touch lingered on my skin, igniting a passion I hadn't felt before. The district attorney's conference room had a dated look, unchanged for decades, much like everything else in this place. Tanya Marshall, daughter of a former state senator, owed her position to family connections. Like most assistant district attorneys, she was part of a system that oppressed the poor and vulnerable while complaining about the wealthy hiring top defense lawyers. Where's your tool, Mr. Gray? She asked. We didn't find it during our search of your house. My tool? I replied, confused. The Smith & Wesson .44 Magnum registered to you. Is it missing? You know it is. Sorry, this is news to me. It was in the top drawer of my nightstand. Are you saying it's gone? This would be easier if we could be honest with each other, she pressed. Fine. But can you first tell me what evidence your officers supposedly found at my house? Well then, I'll answer your questions when the time is right, I said, rising from my chair. In that case, she replied, handing me a notice of my right to appear before the grand jury. This notice was the real reason for our meeting. I had no intention of going. The outcome was inevitable. I would be indicted on 2 counts of murder. To be fair, the DA had no other option. They had broken into my wife's desk and seized her diary. They knew the entire sad story of her affair. Of course, to people like Tanya, it seemed like a tragic love story. My perspective was quite different. It was a shame about the desk. It was a narrow drop front, an antique from the late colonial era. It had sat in the dealer's window for nearly a year. We were newly married, and our daughter Rachel was just learning to walk. Elaine was pursuing her MSW in social work part-time. I was a newly minted lawyer, not well off, but deeply in love with my wife, and I knew how much she wanted that desk. Every time we passed by the shop, she would stop to admire it. I saved every penny I could, but when I finally went to buy it for our anniversary, it was gone from the window. My heart sank as I entered the store and asked about the little desk that had been in the window. The girl at the counter seemed confused, but when she asked the manager, he said it had been moved to the back of the shop. When they delivered it to our small apartment, Elaine was thrilled. Over the years, I watched her at that desk and felt fortunate to have her as my wife. Love, I've come to realize, is about those small moments. The joy over a simple antique desk, witnessing our daughter's first steps, moving into our first home, and seeing Elaine proudly earn her MSW. It's all these moments together that make up love. They forcefully pulled open the desk drawers and found the diary. Perhaps I could have left the drawers unlocked, but then they might have missed the diary's significance. Locking the drawers drew attention to them, ensuring they would find the diary. Still, the destruction of the desk pained me deeply. It hammered home the realization that Elaine was truly lost to me. The diary achieved its purpose. Its contents soon became public. Pressure mounted on the DA. With the evidence in hand and the story of illicit love made public, the unfaithful spouse and her lover were turned into a modern-day Romeo and Juliet. January 2nd. I'm not sure if I can do it. Can I? Jenny just laughs off my hesitation. What's wrong with you? Your husband's out of town. You go over to his apartment and no one will know. It's that simple. How will I face Bruce again? Regardless of what people say about him, he's always been good to me. What will I say if he finds out? Blame him for leaving you alone so often. He's not really gone that much. And when we're together, well, it's a good marriage. It's just that Paul makes me feel things I've never felt before. Like I said, Bruce won't find out, and if he does, just handle it like I did with Bob. What did you do? Remember that day they came over here and he seemed so upset? Yes, I remember he asked if he could lie down in the bedroom. He seemed almost sick. Well, he found out I was seeing Paul, so I told him everything, assured him I still loved him, and explained there was nothing he could do about it because Paul had a way with women. I think he wanted to confront Paul physically, but he wouldn't stand a chance. You're lucky he doesn't have a magnum, I said. I can't imagine Bruce handling it like Bob did. I feel like Bruce might react differently, but Jenny insisted I was wrong. We talked about how much Bruce loved me and would understand, just like Bob did. I've seen Paul about 6 times in the past 3 weeks. We've never been alone, but I'd catch glimpses of him here and there. He might have been following me, or maybe he was following Bruce. My husband's been home and very attentive. We've made love nearly every night because I've been so aroused. But I can't lie to myself about it. Even though I'm in bed with my husband, it's Paul I'm thinking about. Today, Paul slipped me a note with an address, a date, and a time. I'm pretty sure it's his apartment address, and it's for a day when Bruce will be in New York. I don't want to go, yet I know I will. I tell myself I'll go just to ask him to stop bothering me. January 15th. Oh God, what have I done? I spent the afternoon at Paul's apartment. It started off fine. I explained how we could never be together, how I couldn't betray my husband. But then he kissed me, and all my resolve vanished. He pulled me into his bedroom and slowly undressed me. My blouse came off first, followed by my skirt. He kissed me passionately, his hands exploring every inch of my skin. He unhooked my bra and let it fall, revealing my vulnerability. While still kissing me, he knelt down and kissed me through my delicate lace panties. I guess wearing those expensive panties showed I wasn't really serious about not having closeness with him. He lifted me onto his bed, removing the rest of my clothes. He kissed me all over, his touch igniting my skin. This man had such power over me. He undressed in an instant, revealing his incredible physique. His strong abs and impressive manhood stood out far more than what my husband had to offer. I pulled him closer, guiding him inside me where he filled me like never before. It only took a few thrusts before I climaxed gloriously. He made love to me intensely. His stamina was remarkable, and he quickly recovered each time. We spent the entire afternoon and evening together, lost in passion. I peaked multiple times, and he did it inside me at least 4 times. As I left, tears streamed down my face, knowing it couldn't happen again. But deep down, neither of us believed it was truly over. As I walked out his door, I already knew I would return. Tanya's opening statement to the jury was a step above her usual performance, indicating it was likely crafted by a skilled writer. Her boss, D.A. Silva Marks, sat beside her, ensuring he shared the credit while avoiding the actual work. I represented myself in court. Judge Bascom, presiding over the case, cautioned me that a lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client. I retorted that it was better than having a fool for a lawyer. Bascom seemed determined to ensure my conviction, bending over backwards to assist the prosecution and instructing the jury in a way that skewed the concept of reasonable doubt towards guilty until proven innocent. My main concern was that someone might discover I had a hidden advantage waiting to be used. Despite having truth on my side, the prosecution painted a compelling narrative of a tragic love story between a police officer and my social worker wife, with me cast as the villain regardless of my innocence. Life isn't fair, and courtroom justice is often elusive. Sergeant McVeigh, did you open the trunk of the defendant's car? Tanya questioned her first witness. Yes, I was immediately suspicious of the vehicle. It was an older brown Toyota Camry. Not the type you'd expect a high-profile lawyer to drive, but it's inconspicuous with a spacious trunk, Sergeant McVeigh replied. I see, Tanya said, turning to the jury with a knowing smile. What did you find in the trunk? Tanya inquired further. It appeared recently cleaned, but we recovered hair and fibers matching both Officer Paul Moreno and Elaine Gray, Sergeant McVeigh responded. So, could their bodies have been placed in the trunk? Tanya pressed. Objection, Your Honor. This calls for speculation, I interjected. The witness is qualified to give an opinion. Overruled. Please proceed, Sergeant, Judge Bascom ruled. And so it continued. Sergeant McVeigh enthusiastically explained to the jury his belief that I had transported and disposed of the bodies of my wife and her lover. During cross-examination, I asked, Sergeant, if the bodies were transported in the Camry, what happened to Paul Moreno's bright blue Ford Mustang Shelby 500 GT? I'm not sure what you're referring to, McVeigh responded. Paul Moreno's car, his flashy sports car. It's missing, I clarified. Yes, Paul's car is missing, McVeigh admitted. Back to the Camry. You broke into it, but why didn't you use the keys in the ignition? I questioned. We might not have seen them, McVeigh replied. But earlier you used those keys to open the trunk, didn't you? I pressed. McVeigh hesitated briefly, caught off guard. Before he could answer, Tanya objected. The question is argumentative and assumes facts not in evidence. The objection was sustained, preventing me from pursuing further with that line of questioning. Next, Tanya called senior crime scene investigator Kim Eng to the stand. He described discovering red traces under my basement carpet. Could you determine the blood type or DNA from it? Tanya asked seriously. No, it was too degraded. There was a strong bleach smell in the basement, which led me to suspect there might be traces. Bleach is often used to clean stains, Investigator Eng explained. During my cross-examination, I asked, Investigator Eng, the basement included the laundry area, correct? Yes, he confirmed. One would expect to find bleach in a laundry area, wouldn't you? I queried. I can't say for sure. It depends on the individual's laundry habits, Eng replied. The 7 female jurors didn't seem entirely convinced by Eng's responses. Now it was time for the dramatic reading of my wife's diary to commence, the real highlight of the trial. January 16th. I'm torn between guilt and euphoria. Thoughts of Paul's incredible physique and how he made me feel consume me. Yet, I'm overwhelmed with guilt about Bruce. I wish, for once, I could believe the awful things people say about him, but I know they're false. Bruce has always shown his love for me, and I've repaid him with the worst betrayal. Somehow, I feel my terrible sin must be evident to Bruce when he looks at me, revealing what I've done to him, to us. The very desk I'm writing on was a gift from Bruce, bought when money was tight. It's a genuine antique I admired in a shop window, but knew we couldn't afford. Partly our financial struggles were my fault. I longed for a child soon after we married, despite our precarious situation. Bruce had just started his job and I was still in graduate school. Despite our poverty, I stopped taking birth control on my own, though it should have been a mutual decision. Bruce never complained. He was delighted with my pregnancy, though he worried about our finances and would have waited until we were more stable. Even as we struggled, he somehow found the means to buy me an extravagant gift. My loving husband of 15 years, whom I've betrayed so easily. I'm torn between avoiding Paul forever and running to him eagerly. When Bruce returns from his trip tonight, I'm sure he'll sense something, and perhaps that will resolve everything one way or another. I don't know what I'll say to him. I can't bear to hurt him. January 17th. Nothing happened last night. If Bruce noticed or suspected what I've been up to while he was away, he showed no sign. Yet our interactions felt strained, as if a distance had grown between us. I might be imagining the very thing I fear. Bruce seemed tired and acted differently. For now, I'll wait and see. I left home early to avoid seeing Bruce in the harsh morning light. Shortly after arriving at work, my cell phone rang. It was Paul. He wanted to talk, and we did until I had to start my workday. Somehow, talking to him lifted my spirits and gave me hope that everything would somehow work out. I had to admit that what I felt for Paul was love, though maybe not the forever kind I have with Bruce, but a deep and passionate feeling unlike anything I've experienced before. January 19th. I took some time off and said I was going for a long lunch, but I actually met Paul at his apartment. He's on the 4 to midnight shift. We spent 2 blissful hours together. I even tried to give him BJ, something I've rarely done with Bruce. With my husband, it's usually been mostly about me, but with Paul, I couldn't get enough of him. I was so engrossed that I didn't stop when he ejaculated in my mouth. At home, Bruce seemed distant, though I'm unsure if it's all in my head. We haven't had closeness since he returned from New York, but he'll be home this weekend, and I plan to make it up to him. February 12th. I've been in turmoil for the past month. My affair with Paul seems to be intensifying. We meet during the day at his place at least twice a week, and in the evenings when Bruce is out of town, which is often lately. Paul claims Bruce is involved with dangerous people. The FBI is worried because their surveillance efforts aren't working. Bruce is legally blocking their warrants and helping them get sophisticated anti-bugging equipment that's normally banned but can be acquired with special permits. Paul didn't explicitly say it, but I know part of his job still involves surveilling my husband. I suppose I should be grateful that Paul almost always knows where my husband is. But the tension keeps growing. I'm stuck between two lovers, both of whom I love deeply, yet they are enemies. I feel trapped in this no-win situation with no way out. Bruce has been the epitome of a good husband, buying me little gifts for no reason, sending flowers, and making love so sweetly. However, I can't shake the feeling that somehow he knows what's been going on behind his back. He shows no sign of knowing, but after 15 years I can tell when something is bothering him. "I'm sorry, Mr. Gray, but I don't see the issue with admitting your wife's diary into evidence," Judge Bascom said in his chambers. We were discussing the prosecution's request to introduce Elaine's diary as evidence. "I understand. So, the concept of hearsay doesn't concern you at all?" I asked. It was clear that Elaine's diary was an out-of-court statement being presented for its truth. "It falls under one of the exceptions to the hearsay rule," Tanya argued. "Which one, exactly?" I pressed. "Several," she replied vaguely, not specifying any in particular. I knew I wasn't going to win this argument. Tanya believed she needed the diary to ensure my conviction, and the judge was inclined to admit it. "The diary will be admitted. If I'm mistaken, you can take it up with the appeals court," the judge declared. On appeal, the prosecution would likely argue that admitting the diary was a harmless error, though that wouldn't be entirely accurate. But what did it matter? I was already deemed guilty by everyone, including the appeals court judges. Tanya had an attractive young clerk from her office read my wife's diary on the witness stand. The girl looked about 22 with straight, dark hair and innocent brown eyes. She blushed charmingly at the more scandalous parts of Elaine's writing, which seemed to mitigate any judgment the jury might have felt towards the affair of the woman I had loved and remained faithful to for 15 years. March 16th. Rachel is back home for spring break. I haven't seen or heard from my daughter since Christmas. She seems really happy. I'm not exactly sure why she wanted to go to boarding school, but I suspect it had something to do with the rumors about Bruce. She loves her dad, but it must be tough for a teenager to deal with what people say about him. With Rachel home, Paul and I can't meet at my place anymore. Paul thinks some people at his job might suspect our relationship. It could harm his career if news of our affair gets out while he's on the team investigating Bruce. Paul plans to request a transfer. He wants me to leave Bruce. But faced with that choice, I realize Paul's suggestion is wrong. And what I've been doing with Paul is wrong. My affair is wrong on many levels. When I see Rachel, I remember above all that I'm her mom and Bruce's wife. Neither of them deserves the pain they'd feel if I ran away with Paul. The hurt I'd cause my family would be far worse than the pain I'd feel from losing Paul. I think I'm starting to see things clearly now. This passion that took over me clouded my judgment. I need to clear my head and do what's necessary to end things with Paul. I'm determined. When I see Paul tomorrow, I'll break it off. I know he'll be hurt, but he'll move on. I know for sure he won't be alone. Jenny is waiting in the wings. She's young and beautiful, with a husband who has no choice but to tolerate her affair with Paul. There's nothing Bob can do to a man like Paul. Everyone seems to think Bruce is a very different kind of man than average. Would Bruce harm Paul if he found out? I don't think Bruce would ever hurt me. But what if I'm wrong? The awful things people say about Bruce, they can't be true. I've known him all these years, loved him all these years, and yet I have doubts. Paul strongly believes my husband could be dangerous and fears for my safety. But I just can't bring myself to believe Bruce would harm anyone. When I look at Bruce, I see the kind, gentle man I married, the loving father of our daughter, the man who has always put Rachel and me first in all our years of marriage. Tomorrow when I see Paul, I have to end it. It'll be hard, but it's the right thing to do. I called Jenny and suggested she reach out to Paul after tomorrow to comfort him. Tanya's attractive and youthful legal assistant wrapped up the final entry in my wife's diary. The prosecution aimed to portray me as the villainous husband trying to break up the star-crossed lovers, but I didn't interpret Elaine's diary that way. Ultimately, my wife chose her family over the man who pursued her, Paul Moreno. He knowingly pursued Elaine despite knowing she was happily married. Perhaps he believed the negative stories spun about me by law enforcement. Maybe he thought he could rescue the woman he had fallen in love with. The truth is, the lovers delayed too long and tragedy befell them. In situations like this, there are many what-ifs. If Elaine had confessed to me earlier, or if they had ended it sooner, who knows what might have transpired. But that wasn't my main concern. My priority was saving myself. After the diary was read in court, the jury was poised to convict, and everyone knew it. I had a long list of witnesses, but only one really mattered. Jake Trumbull took the stand. On paper, my other witnesses seemed ordinary. Jake's expert report was filled with technical jargon and buried details, including a video mentioned on page 439. We began with his credentials: an electrical engineering degree from RIT, a stint in Army intelligence, and 20 years with the FBI. Not a bad resume. I omitted the part where he worked for criminal organizations after leaving the government. His expertise was crucial in helping me and others evade government surveillance. Mr. Trumbull, have you worked for me before? Yes, many times. What was your most recent assignment for me? I set up a comprehensive surveillance system that covered both your home and office inside and out. We call it a black cover because it's designed to uncover any illicit activities. What do you mean by dirty deeds? Typically things like unauthorized entries to plant bugs or evidence. Did you witness any such activities? Yes, my team and I observed Sergeant McVeigh taking keys from a brown Camry and using them to open the trunk. He then emptied material from a bag into the trunk. Later, he returned with other officers who broke into the trunk using a crowbar. They proceeded to collect trace samples from inside. The courtroom reacted with shock and murmurs. Trumbull continued, presenting the video evidence he had gathered. We submitted this as evidence despite objections from the prosecution. Trumbull further exposed the planting of blood that investigator Eng had discovered. As a result, the prosecution's case fell apart. Without the forensic evidence, they couldn't even prove that a crime had occurred. All they had were missing individuals, a missing Magnum, and a car that couldn't be located. My daughter Rachel hugged me tightly after the verdict of innocence. Her belief that I hadn't ended her mother was the most important thing to me. Many others thought I had gotten away with murder. Surprisingly, no actions were taken against the officers who had tried to frame me. In the end, their actions inadvertently saved me by providing the prosecution with a case to bring to trial. During the long, dry summer, the Schoharie River shrank to a muddy trickle, revealing the blue Ford Mustang hidden in its deepest part. The bodies were still inside the car. They must have been trapped within the car's frame when the floodwaters first carried it away, and then sank it in the fast-moving waters. Elaine's purse was found with the GPS I had planted, along with what remained of my wife's body. It turned out she had been right. I had been more than suspicious. I had been gathering evidence of her infidelity. I loved her deeply, and her betrayal cut me to the core. In my eyes, Paul Moreno was a villain who had come to ruin a strong marriage. It pained me greatly, but I was considering divorce, not murder. Yet I knew the police would never believe that. My wife and her lover were dead, and even if I were blameless, they would still hold me responsible. I was far from innocent in their eyes. Elaine was found under her lover, both partially dressed. It was revealed they had been shot, with Paul Moreno likely the intended target, as the bullets passed through him into Elaine. This tragic double murder was the result of a .44 Smith & Wesson recovered from the Mustang's floor. It was my tool, the one that had gone missing. If only the police and prosecutor had waited, they wouldn't have needed to plant evidence. The diary had forced their hand. It painted a narrative of lovers torn apart by a cruel, unscrupulous lawyer husband, prompting the DA to act prematurely. Public opinion pressured the police into their usual tricks. I had been framed, but skill and luck saved me. As a lawyer, I took pride in my work while law enforcement grumbled about how the system had been manipulated by a cunning attorney. Lottie set down the beers with a smile and placed a supportive hand on my shoulder at the Chambers, a lawyer's bar in the city. She didn't need to say she was there for me. Her actions showed it. Lottie had changed jobs, and out of loyalty, I followed her. Overall, the Chambers was a more welcoming place for me to have a drink than the Falcon's Rest. The police would never forgive me for outmaneuvering them, but the patrons here sympathized with the underdog, the lawyer whose reputation had been tarnished. This perception was misguided. The clients I needed to impress saw my acquittal on a charge I appeared guilty of as a testament to my legal prowess. Due to all the negative publicity, I had to raise my hourly rate and bring on a young female associate to handle the increased workload. Surprisingly, rather than being tarnished, I emerged as an unconventional hero. Tanya, on the other hand, was forced out of the DA's office, blamed for the case's failure. My drinking buddy downed half his Sam Adams in one gulp. "Relax, Bob. No need to rush. I don't have a wife at home, and yours isn't worth going back to," I joked. Bob frowned, seeming to realize that some women, despite their looks, aren't worth the trouble. Jenny fell into that category. "I'm sorry about," he started, then trailed off. "No need for apologies," I reassured him. "Under the circumstances, none are expected." "But I never meant to hurt Elaine," he pleaded. "Of course not. It was an accident. You're not familiar with tools. You couldn't have known the bullets would go through Officer Moreno to the woman he was with," I argued. Encouraged, Bob continued. "Exactly. The way he had the seats set up, they reclined all the way like a bed. You couldn't even see who was underneath. I was so upset after Jenny said she'd see him again." "You were in a kind of daze, not fully aware of what you were doing." "But did you wipe my magnum for prints before planting it?" I asked. "I might have. I wasn't thinking straight. I had taken it earlier, intending to scare him off. It was your tool because I knew you kept one in your bedroom for protection. Finding it was easy. You didn't hide it. A guy like you probably needs that protection. Actually, it was a gift from a client. I kept it in the bedroom for Elaine's safety when I was away." He nodded seriously, and I wondered if he grasped the irony of our situation. She told me she'd be seeing him again, just like that. "Paul will need some friendly comfort," she said. I couldn't ignore it. I went to his place to warn him that I wouldn't tolerate it. His car was gone. I called home, but there was no answer. I'm afraid I jumped to conclusions. "Under the circumstances, a reasonable mistake," I interjected. I knew where he took his women in that disgusting car of his. It had started to rain, and it was very dark when I reached the county road leading to the creek. I parked up the road and walked down toward the creek. On a clear night, the moon would light up the area, but the weather was turning. They were on the passenger side, but the driver's window was partly down. I heard them laughing, and then she moaned in a way that hit me hard. I didn't think, I just shot. Then the tool seemed to slip from my hand, or maybe I dropped it. I didn't realize it was Elaine in the car until later. "I'm so sorry. Will you tell the police now?" he asked, looking worried. I shrugged. "Why should I? It's not my place to judge you. I may be many things, but I'm not a hypocrite." "But I ended your wife," he said. "Yes, but it was an accident. I don't know how the car ended up in the creek. I thought it would be found right away. But when it wasn't, people started accusing you." "Naturally, but without bodies or a tool, they couldn't prove I was guilty. The GPS I planted in my wife's purse told me where she was. I figured the rising water floated the car into the flooded creek. Then it sank. It was only a matter of time before the car, the bodies, or both, surfaced. Since my magnum was missing, I had a good idea of how the lovers died and who would be blamed." "I'm sorry for that, and for how many still see you as guilty. You should turn me in," Bob said quietly. "What can I say? We can't control what people believe, and I can't disprove an appealing lie with an unpleasant truth." "No, you're safe from me," I assured him. "Then why did you ask me here?" "I've got something for you," I said, pulling the document from my jacket pocket. "What's this?" he asked. "My bill, of course. I put up a strong defense in that murder case." "But you were defending yourself," he pointed out. "And whose fault was that? I spent time and money on it, and the responsible party needs to cover the costs. And let me say, I did a damn good job. You should be satisfied." "This is quite a hefty sum," he remarked. "It was quite a defense," I countered. "Do you take American Express?" "Absolutely." I think Bob felt relieved that I wouldn't reveal his secret, but as I mentioned, it's not my place to judge. In our world, the assumption of innocence has been replaced by the assumption of guilt. In such an unfair world, a man has to rely on his wits. As Bob left, Lottie brought me another Boston lager. "Are you okay?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "Yeah, everything works out for the best in the end."